on YouTube. David McMurdo made this video, hiya David, asking, why is there a confusion, or why is there an apparent paradox between the concept of free will, however you understand that term, and the concept of foreknowledge. He's presenting it largely in theological terms, but there's kind of secular and more small-scale versions of it available too. A theological version of that would be, God knows everything, He knows what's going to happen, and yet we have free will. So some people would say, those things are mutually incompatible. If he knows what's going to happen, then it's definitely going to happen, and this free will thing, this sense of agency I have, is an illusion. David, I think quite rightly, says those things aren't necessarily the case. Those things can coexist, and that's, on a small scale, that's called compatibilism, isn't it, in philosophy? That's the stuff that Dan Dennett and many other people talk about. We are free to do whatever it is we turn out to exactly do. We are free to do whatever turns out to be the case. I think many of us, myself included, are a little bit unhappy about that, but that's mainly to do with how we understand these terms, free will and knowledge. And knowledge, I think, is a particularly difficult one. Just to give the smaller version of that, just to make sure so it doesn't sound like it's just a theological conversation. The other example that David gives is of the class of whether I know whether you're going to do something or not, does that constrain your free will in that choice? So if I know that you prefer chocolate ice cream to vanilla ice cream, when you walk into a shop, does that mean that you have no free choice about which ice cream to buy? You could buy vanilla, yes, or you could buy chocolate. But because I know that you prefer chocolate, I know you're going to buy it, and sure enough you do. So did you have free choice anyway? It's that kind of a thing, yeah. But again, compatibilist philosophies kind of accept that as free will. That's the only free will worth having. So Daniel Dennett says it's the freedom to do whatever is going to be the case. I don't know. It's this term knowledge I'm having a difficulty with in that one. In terms of my knowing whether you're going to have something or not, whether you're going to prefer chocolate to vanilla, or whether God knows everything. Because knowledge is not a simple term. I don't think. Not a simple term at all. We tend to think of it in really simple terms. We treat as knowledge as something that we possess. And sometimes there's a classification of knowledge called possessive knowledge. So we treat it like, sorry, I'm just bending down here, we treat an item of knowledge, a fact you might say, like an object, a rock. Battle of Hastings, 1066. I didn't have it and now I do. It's a rock. And I can give the rock to you and then you possess this piece of knowledge. And it's a kind of hard piece of datum, is that right? Data? Anyway, it has that kind of quality. And in that understanding of it, it's very mechanistic, very Newtonian. It configures knowledge as the exchange of relatively well-defined objects between the participants in that exchange. Like a machine. Like a machine would move things around the place and separate and share things and duplicate things and doing all those kind of human scale things. And within that configuration, if that's what's going on behind the scenes of your thought and the imagination which allows you to have this conversation, if that's what's going on, then it doesn't make any sense that there is an incompatibility there between knowledge and free will. Because you don't, because it's the journey that this rock made is predestined by my knowledge of its path. So of course you have to join that path. You don't have any freedom to take that rock on another journey. That rock is predetermined. But that's only one kind of knowledge, possessive knowledge. The idea that knowledge is a series of facts that we move around the place is only one way of looking at it. There's other kinds of knowledge systems, and most of the stuff we have, most of the things we know aren't like that at all. The way that knowledge is configured, there's lots of different ways of talking about it. The one I like is it's performative. People talk about performative knowledge, which is comes from a guy called David Perkins, but he's talking about it in terms of, knowledge isn't something that just exists outside in the world, separate from your engagement with it. It's something that you do. It's something that you turn around, that you manipulate. It's hard to wrap your head around, but this this is how it seems to work for not a lot of the time. A lot of things we know them not as possessions but as performances, as actions. They're performed in the action. They exist only in the action of them. And then there's a form of knowledge which to return to Perkins, calls proactive knowledge, which in some ways overlaps with what other people refer to as wisdom, which is it's not an object outside of oneself or something that one does. It's a kind of predisposition almost, a predisposition in oneself, which, again, it's so hard. If you're used to the idea of knowledge being a collection of facts, this is going to sound completely alien to you. But there is a way of understanding knowledge where it's a predisposition. It's something that you that motivates your actions in the world. And gives them a kind of creative, proactive means of engaging, really, very close to wisdom. And those much kind of softer, if I can call it that, much more tacit, much closer to being itself, those kind of versions of knowledge are less obviously in setting up paradoxical relationships with free will in the broadest sense. And again, I'm using free will in inverted commas because I think that's got its own set of problems with it, or a set of expansions that you need to do on it to make it work, really. So yeah, I don't know if that makes any sense, but I think some of the problems come from the way we understand things, and we tend not to think about how we understand things. We just are presented with the feelings of that understanding. But I think if we get under the bonnet, it can reveal some of the mechanisms, and the mechanism by which we understand a word like knowledge, understand that feeling that we have, and particularly if we understand it not as a series of exchanges of these hard objects of data, coalition of this data into patterns we call information, internalisation of that pattern information to something we might call knowing, and then the formulation of that internalised feeling of knowing into a way of engaging in the world, something we might call wisdom. If we get a better sense of that, I think it makes a more rich way of understanding the relationship between that and something like agency or intentionality or will. Anyway, I don't know if that's an answer or not. There you go.